My guest today is Lou Mitchell from Maura Faye Casting. Lou has worked for 30 years at Maura Faye. I'm incredibly excited to have her join me today. Thank you so much for coming along, Lou.
Thanks for having me, Leslie.
It's just great. I would like to start out by hearing about Maura Faye Casting. Tell me about the firm.
Okay, well, Maura Faye, the woman, was very dynamic and ahead of her time as far as casting goes. Maura was very young when she started casting, and she started casting in-house for things like Prisoner. Beyond that, she went out on her own and started her own company, and she set up in King's Cross in Sydney. And she was doing freelance casting, and one of the major shows that we did in Sydney was The Brides of Christ, which was a fantastic show.
Yeah.
Then she heard about that the Americans were going to be coming out to Australia and shooting in Queensland. So Maura flew to America and met a lot of the potential new clients before they arrived in Queensland. We opened a Queensland office, we opened a Melbourne office so that we could accommodate all of their needs. And we then had a very long association with American projects and American producers, as well as always doing Australian projects. Queensland was very exciting at the time, so we also had a couple of different soap operas running up there, which was fantastic for Queensland because that is exactly what they needed. You need to have work everywhere so that actors can learn their craft, and that's one of the hardest things when we don't have enough product to be able to offer them. And so it was a really exciting time in the early 90s, mid 90s, with a lot of production happening. Maura continually had to, and she was also training all of us as well, had to change her ideas of what casting was. We had been following very much an English mould. We liked character actors and we liked comedy and things like that. When the Americans arrived, it was all about, a lot of it was about beauty, and it was a different style, and height and broadness of accents. So that changed the space of Australia too, with everybody all of a sudden getting trained up with their American accents. Maura herself then went on to split the business and start a corporate business where she was training people with acting skills in middle management and upper middle management, and very, very upper management in presenting skills. And she was probably one of the first that was doing that. She started that in 89 or 90, I think. And unfortunately, Maura died. She passed away in 2001 from a stroke, and she was very young. So luckily for us, her younger sister took over the business, and we have managed to carry on her name very proudly.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Are you also doing, still do corporate training? I think you were doing some corporate training.
The company has now been split, but there is a company called Maura Faye Learning, and they do corporate training, but they are two separate companies.
You've touched on one of the things that I wanted to come back to, which is what are the skills that you need as a casting director to be able to get work? Because it strikes me a lot of it is a relationship. It's very relationship based.
It's a lot about relationship, and it's a lot about return work. When we work with a client and they're happy with us and we hope that we get the next job, doesn't always happen, but mostly it does. It's funny because a lot of actors don't realise this, and then they ask when I say, oh, we didn't get that job, and they go, God, you're just like us. You have to go out and try for the jobs. And the landscape of casting has changed a lot, and there's a lot more casting directors. There's a lot more agents, and there's a lot more actors. So from the time that I started to now, it has changed enormously. And a lot of people move agents quite quickly. So it's not like you just, oh, I remember where that person is anymore. And there's a lot more casting directors out, so there's a lot more competition. So yes, we do have to go out and talk to clients, go and meet clients. We still go to America. That's something we still do most years. We've got colleagues that we use in London and New Zealand. We do pop-ups in other states. We're always diversifying ourselves to continue to get the work. And I've got older colleagues and younger colleagues, so that we're right across everyone, and we need a few of us because we need to know who's coming up outside the drama schools, and so there's a lot of work involved.
being a people person must be one of the very top skills that you have in your business, because you not only need to be developing and maintaining relationships with the people who give you work, but also when you get an actor in the room, there's quite an art, I think, to being able to work with an actor in the room, given that you've got a very short amount of time, there's a lot of nerves. So how do you work with actors in the room?
Well, I think every show is different. When I'm working with a client that I know really well, then I kind of know what they're looking for, because I've got that relationship, and so I know, so I can almost say to the actor, okay, what's required here is this. If it's an unknown quantity, or if I'm actually doing auditions for my colleagues in Sydney, so it's not my show, I'm purely facilitating it for them, I can be a little bit more creative or inventive. I'm always looking to see that you can take direction. That's the main thing, because the first thing the director will ask me is, can they take direction? So I'll normally always do a couple of takes where I get a variation.
What's your technique for relaxing people when they come into the room?
Talking. Sometimes I'm a little distracting. But I just think, asking them a few questions before we go into doing the audition. How's your day? How have you been? Are you well? And sometimes you'll get a bit of a nod of, can we just go into it? I'm in the zone, and that's fine.
That was one of the things I actually wanted to ask you about. I recently did an audition for a job that was very heavily emotionally based. And I walked in, I was really loaded and ready to go. And the casting agent said to me, oh, we're not doing that today, because I couldn't handle having a whole day of people coming in with this very heavy emotional material. So we'll save that for the callbacks. So what's it like from your side of the table when you're spending a whole day with people who have that heavy emotional load?
Well, it's interesting, because I always say to actors, you never know what you're going to give, and I never know what I'm going to get. Quite often I've been in tears, which I didn't know were even there, and someone's just tapped into it and hit something in one of their auditions, and it's taken me by surprise. And I see the same thing happen to them. They have no intention of doing tears, and they go, I don't know what just happened. And I go, oh, it must be one of those days. And that's always very refreshing when you don't know what's happening, because I do think that's when you're connecting the most to the emotion, when you have no control over it and it comes up. I understand from the casting director's point of view going, I don't want to have a big heavy day like that. But if you've prepped for it, then I think it's tough. And it's also tough that you would have to give me the nod and go, don't talk to me, I want to just get this out. And I go, oh, okay. And I have to be respectful of your work that you've done. And
so you must have some days that are really emotionally very intense.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, we've had. When we used to do things like the Mission Impossible series and things like that, we used to have a lot of people being held at gunpoint and things like that, followed by, I did city homicides, there's a lot of gun work in there and threats. Then I did a murder mystery, so there was a lot of, not the actual murder, but a lot of post-murder scenes, so a lot of emotion. But they're all fun. They're all interesting. Yes, it can be draining. Yes, you can come home and go, wow, I feel like I've done 10 hours of therapy. I think that's what makes the job still a good job, because no 2 days are the same.
Is it different working on a small job to a big job, and if so, how?
It's like saying to an actor, there's no small parts. I don't actually, the small job gets the equal amount of attention.
Sure.
The big jobs are bigger because there's more to facilitate. So if it's a big series with a big ensemble cast, that's a lot of roles, which means you have to collate auditions and self-tapes and unavailabilities and restrictions and all sorts of things like that. So it's big in that sense. But a small job can be equally as intense if you don't get it right. And they keep going, can you go back and start again? You may only want 3 roles, but you've got to get it right.
When you're doing classes as an actor, one of the things that people tell you is to go in with a strong choice. Be different, whatever you do, commit to it and go with it. What is it that you look for when people come in to audition?
I think mainly we always want people to have done the preparation. So the preparation is key, because once you've got the lines down, we can do anything in the room, and we can be bold, or we can just go, no, we want it just more run of the mill, or just be safe, or whatever. It is a strange one to say go and be bold, because you could come in going, I'm going to be this enormous performance that's unnecessary. So you'd go, wasn't that being bold? Understanding the text and what you're doing, and so that's also falls into preparation. Then it's easy to go, well, I can make an informed choice here, because this is how I feel the character would react to something that's coming at them. The main thing that I really look for is that you listen, actively listening. I find that I do so many auditions with actors that are in the room, and you would think they're in the room on their own. They don't hear the reader. That's nerves.
Yes,
because they've come in and they're concerned about what they're going to do, which has now stopped them having the process of listening to what's coming at them. If you can't hear that, then you really don't know how to react to it.
Which brings us back to that age-old thing about relaxation and listening.
Absolutely.
Doesn't it?
I've been saying this for a long time. You only have 10 minutes in the room, and what we want is we want you to have a good time. We want you to be able to walk out and say, oh, I nailed that and I feel happy with my choices. Yeah. It's not about getting the job, because no one can control the getting the job. Not even the casting director can control you getting the job. Yeah. So it's a case of coming in, being happy what you do, and walking out the door. Having said that, Bryan Cranston was interviewed after winning an award, I think a Golden Globe or something, for Breaking Bad. And he says it far more eloquently. He says he used to think auditioning, screen testing, was about getting the job. When he realised it wasn't about getting the job, but going in and doing good work, he changed his mindset, and then all the jobs flowed after.
Isn't that interesting? One of the things I think that has been useful for me is Richard Sarrell, in fact, said, auditioning is working. It is what you do. So you shouldn't expect that you're going in to try out for the job. You are actually doing the job. And I think that's a really useful way of looking at it.
Coming from a wonderful man, I think that is a great thing to say. As an actor, screen testing and auditioning is part of your job, so it is already working. So if you lived in the States, for example, and you had 5 auditions a day and 5 days a week, that's 20 auditions or screen tests, but everyone uses different terminology for different things. So that's your working week. That's what you do. You may not be getting an income for it. You're hoping to get an income for it, but that's your job.
I think it's a really important way to look at it. It would be
a terrible thing if you didn't enjoy it, or if you were constantly going, I didn't do a good job, I didn't do a good job. So you may as well go, I'm out there, I'm already working. And I think that feeds into the thing when people say, when they tell people socially, I'm an actor, and the person says back to them, over a dinner or something, oh, would I have seen you in anything?
Yes.
No, but I work pretty much every day. Sometimes I do suit work, sometimes I do promotional work, sometimes I help fledgling doctors, sometimes I read in auditions. I'm doing a play reading currently. I work as an actor. No, but you may not have seen me in anything. But you will one day, watch this space.
That's really eloquent.
I think actors need to keep doing the work, and we've now become, and this took a while too, we have become a country where there are more and more classes that you can do. There are drop-in classes and things like that. And people are doing more and more of those and building their networks, because it's good to be around other actors and like-minded people. And within those classes and within that training, you'll find somebody who's doing a short film and they'll need to cast you in that short film. So then that's a job that you've got through that association. So keep doing the work. The jobs will come.
That's a great way of looking at it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. One of the things that you've mentioned to me is that there is now quite a lot more diverse casting. Can you tell me about why that is different?
Well, I'd like to start by saying the casting directors in Australia have been talking about, we didn't call it diversity, we called it colourblind casting for years and years and years. Even before I was at Maura Faye, I was at a company called Crawford Productions.
Yes.
And we used to talk about colourblind casting there.
Really?
And we would put people up and they would go, why are you putting someone with a thick Scottish accent up? Well, because we can. Yes, but then we'd have to explain where they come from and why they're there. And I go, no, not really. So for a long time, we as casting directors have been talking about it, and we had to sort of wait for everybody else to get on board. Sorry, I will backtrack and say back in the day when I was casting Mission Impossible, we didn't have many African American men living here in Australia. And I did do quite a bit of casting when I would see people and go, oh, here's my card, can you call me? Because that was something that we did lack. But now we have great diversity, and so we have to utilise it, we have to use it. But we had to wait for networks, production companies to get on board as well. Everybody always wanted the first job of getting the Indian family in the street in Ramsay Street, or the Chinese family, or things like that. But when we were doing those Chinese families, we'd have to find mums, dads, grandparents, kids that could all act. And there actually wasn't a huge amount because there hadn't been jobs for them, so they weren't doing the training. Whereas now there's no excuse, it's all there. Yeah. So it's exciting, it's an exciting time. And once again, I think realistically we waited for America to lead the charge because it became so obvious that they weren't doing it. And as soon as they changed, it was like it had a bit of a flow-on domino effect, and right across the world we all became more diverse very quickly.
Yes, it has been really quite quick, which is wonderful to see. Yeah.
Whereas if it had started way back when we all started talking about it, we could have a bit more of a slow burn.
Yeah. Or we'd all be over it by now and wouldn't even be noticing.
Absolutely, yeah.
What has been some of the biggest jobs that you've done?
I did a film last year called The Whistleblower, which is a Chinese-Australian co-production, which I'm going to see this week. That was big as in the enormity of the production. This year we did a fantastic series, the last series of an American series called Preacher, and they decided to shoot that last series here in Australia. And once again, the enormity of numbers out on set, second unit, third unit, main unit, stunt unit, driving units. So that's, when you say big jobs, they're big. So when you go to the wrap party of one of those shows, there's so many people you couldn't know everyone in the room. Yeah. Mission Impossible was my first job with Maura Faye when they moved to Melbourne, and that was big for someone who was starting out, and it was American, and we weren't that great on the accent then, so it was a lot of trial and error. And then I did 4 years of a series called The Man from Snowy River, 4 glorious years, and that was a lot of location work. So we would do location and Melbourne. So just getting your head around schedules, where actors were needed, continuity from going from the location into the studio, because those would be 2 weeks apart. At the same time, I was doing another series called Law of the Land, and that was a Channel 9 series, and A Man from Snowy was also on Channel 9, so there was a bit of crossover and stuff of who would be working where, and I don't keep a CV, and so I do forget about my work.
Can you tell us about, from the point at which you get a job, or indeed how does the brief come to you generally, what is the process that you are involved in?
When I talk about process, I can only talk about my process.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, because I work differently from my colleagues even in Sydney compared to other casting directors. So everybody does things differently. There is 2 sites in Australia, Showcast and Casting Networks, which I use. There are more, but those are the 2 that I use. To brief out, I would normally get the scripts. I break them down. I put the character descriptions into the system, and I would send that brief out to the agents. And so they have an idea of age, height if it's asked for, eye colouring if it's asked for, nationality if it's asked for. They will have it all there, and they will then make their suggestions. This all happens on the same site. The suggestions are suggested, and it's normally headshots. If you double click on any of the headshots, you actually see what the person has done. If you like what you see, you then push a number, basically, and that person goes into another section of the site. Then when it comes to scheduling them, we have a schedule, and they slide straight into the schedule. And then we do the auditions. In Australia, we're not about a numbers game. We're about getting the right people for the right role. Because majority of the time we don't have the time and the money. We don't have those. We don't start casting 12 months in advance, even sometimes 6 months in advance. We find out we've got the job, we hit the ground running, and 3 months later they're probably in production ready to go. That's what we're doing on a domestic front. But sometimes on an international front, in the background, we're doing availability checks through American agents, English agents, Indian agents, you name it, Chinese. So we're doing that behind the scenes while we're doing that, what the people we're going to see here.
What is the process for you with the production team in terms of refining what it is that they're looking for?
With that first round, sometimes we have concept meetings, sometimes some productions don't. But with that first round, we then send off what we've got to the client. They come back and say, you're absolutely on the money, or no, we need a bit more work. So with that process, we go back to the drawing board and we define the character breakdowns.
So you will often have worked with the production team to get a real sense of what the character requires, often by trial and error.
Yes.
And then what happens after that? Once you've sent people off, the castings have gone off, what happens after that?
Sometimes you can get a really quick turnaround, but majority I always say to people, let's just say you won't hear anything for 2 weeks. 2 weeks is a good kind of buffer period of time, because they're in the same boat that we're in. No one person is making the decision. You normally have more than one producer. You normally have a show running director who's the starter, who's the person who's starting it up. So that's 3 people that are involved. You normally have a network. Sometimes you have a different network. So there's a bunch of people that all have to agree. So they then have to come to the party. You hope that everyone's got a similar idea. Otherwise, then casting comes back in and we come back into the fold again and we have a conversation. We go, we all kind of like this guy, but we now think it's worth looking again, having him in mind. And you can understand why. When you see successful television shows, you do want to get that ensemble right.
Yes.
And we do things called chemistry readings where once you're starting the show, if you get the right person for the lead, you then start to bring in who perhaps is going to be the love interest or who perhaps is going to be a parent or things like that, to try and make sure that you do have that right chemistry.
And for me, that would be one of the things that would be different between a small job and a big job, is that you've got a lot more of those sorts of relationships that you have to be able to see on screen, and you do have to have the chemistry and so on as
Correct,
well. Yeah, so that would be a whole lot more complex.
But it's lovely though too.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's lovely to see, because you can't manufacture chemistry, and we don't put that out there that it's a chemistry reading. It's more of, come and meet the cast and things like that, and we hope that you get on. We hope that there's a sort of an association or a working relationship.
For actors that don't have to audition anymore, what's the role that the casting agent has with those people?
So offers have to go out to them. So we have to put a package together of what that offer would look like. And so it would be scripts, and it would be story arcs if we don't have enough scripts to send them, so that they know where that character is going. It would be a monetary offer, and it would be a time offer. Mm-hmm. And then you would have to talk about where they're coming from, where they're going to live, things like that.
Do they sit down with you or with the director and talk about what they want to do with the character?
If there's interest, then they may want to talk to the writer to see where the character's going, and the first director. And it depends on where they are. If they live overseas, we try, perhaps we do Skype, perhaps we do FaceTime, perhaps someone might fly over, so that they can be in the same room. Because that's also a chemistry test. Are we going to be able to work together?
Yeah, absolutely.
If the producer meets with the lead actor that they've had in mind for this role, and they don't get along, or they feel like they're on the wrong page, then that would be something that both parties would have to go, I don't know whether this is the right association, because no one wants to be stuck in a relationship that they never planned to be in, sort of thing. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. And it is a very long process, or can be a very long process.
Can be a very long process.
Yeah. Lou, you mentioned a few minutes ago that you had worked at Crawford Productions. How did you get into this business?
Well, I started when I was very young. I started as the receptionist at Crawford's because I always knew I wanted to work in production. I didn't know what capacity I wanted to work in production. So I started as the receptionist at the best production company you could be in, Crawford Productions. And that was run very much by the personnel department. Was a beautiful woman called Jean, and she used to place people. She literally observed people and decided where they needed to go. So it was all about moving people along at Crawford's and training them. We don't have as such a beautiful training ground anymore, I don't believe, where someone is watching you and moulding you in the right direction. So when a job came up in casting, which I'd always been closely associated with the casting department, she said, would you like to go in there? It was like, well, that kind of makes perfect sense. Because prior to working there, I didn't know there was a job called casting.
Ah.
Because back in the day, producers and directors used to cast themselves. And then casting became a job.
Because there was just too much for them to do.
Too much for them to do. It was a wonderful learning curve and a wonderful place to start.
And you went from there to Maura Faye, did you?
I did.
Wow.
Well, I had a bit of unemployment in between, but yeah. But Maura Faye heard that I was looking for work, and she was about to open a Melbourne office.
Ah, so perfect timing.
It really was a perfect timing, and we met and we got on sensationally, so it was great.
That's wonderful. The industry is changing enormously these days with all the different platforms that are available and so on. What do you see, how do you think it's going to go over the next few years?
It's been hard to change with all the new technology. However, we have to keep up with technology. That's the first thing. We always had to keep up with who the new actors are and any new styles or any new unit. We've always had to do that. The way that it is changing and will continue to change is the self-taping, because people can go on holiday to Bali now and go, I'll send a tape in, I'll record something on my phone. They couldn't do that a few years ago. No. So I think that changes the face of it, and that technology is only going to get better and better. There still will always be a role for a casting director, because we need to be able to explain to our clients that where people are, where they're coming from. We still need to facilitate, and I still think it's very important to get in the room. Self-taping is a great tool, but I think if you have the opportunity to get into the room, you should always take that.
And there's so much going on now online as well as elsewhere. It must be quite a challenge for you to be able to keep up with who's around and what they're doing. It's
a challenge, and there's also the other challenge where people have to remember to not put scenes and things out publicly if they're going to, if they are self-taping. Those scripts belong to the productions, not to them. So the world has become quite big that you can see and be a voyeur and watch everything, but you're actually not supposed to. Those are supposed to be on private platforms and things. So it is tricky. And look, there's a lot of web series. There's a lot of people doing their own comedy. But it's always been difficult for us solo casting directors because we've always had to try and get out and see shows as well. So it's that on a bigger scale.
I'm very glad you said that about the self-tapes, because that has been something that I've spoken to a few actors about, where they have done self-tapes and they've wanted to put them onto their show reels. And I've always thought, well, no, you don't own that material.
You don't own that material. And you really should check with either the casting director or the production company if you have permission to put it out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't know what the lifespan of that is either, so it is a bit...
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that.
And I keep using the terminology casting director, and I'll just tell you why, is because you've been calling me a casting agent, which is fine, but everyone assumes that I represent actors, of which I don't. So I always just refer to myself as a casting director, because even some of my dear friends will say, are those people on your books? And I'll say, I don't have books.
No.
Because it's one of those jobs that I think people don't understand.
I guess the last thing I want to ask you is, where do you see Maura Faye going in the next 5 years? What's the exciting things that are coming up?
Well, obviously, if I use the last 5 years for a guideline for the next 5 years, is technologically we are just moving forward and forward and forward, and you literally cannot be left behind on that, because you are moving. So technologically is exciting, and we've got some lovely projects that we hope get up. That's the other thing about casting directors. We always work in advance with people that have great projects that we can talk about sometimes for up to 5 to 10 years that don't actually get up and get financed.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it's so even if you think we're having downtime, sometimes we're always discussing a script that could be attaching someone to that script to help it get financed, things like that. So I'm hoping to see a couple of our really fabulous projects, fingers crossed, get up, because we love our clients too, and there's some beautiful stories out there to be told.
Yeah, there sure are. Mm.
It's a great industry. It's sometimes we have some really sad times, like I think politically we're in a shitty time at the moment.
Yeah.
We need to look after each other, and we need to keep creating the work to keep it up there, because the arts is very, very important. Entertainment is very important, and actors need jobs and places to go, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to provide those.
Thank you so much, Lou. It's been a delight spending time with you.
Thanks, Leslie.
I've been with Lou Mitchell. Thank you so much for watching Tete-a-Tete.